Okay, today we're going to continue with the section where we left off last time. We finished John 7 and 8, but I would have preferred to have continued on to halfway through chapter 10, since this is actually all one long section. I just could not quite manage that last time. So today, August 15, 2024, just after noon, we're going to read John 9, a story about Jesus healing a man born blind. Now this is happening at the same time, or just after the sequence we just read in chapter 7 and 8. This is during the Feast of Tabernacles, about 6 months before Jesus' death, as far as I can tell. Feast of Tabernacles is in September, Passover is in March. I believe it's going to be the next Passover where Jesus dies. So this follows up on his encounter with the people and the long conversation they had about whose father is who, and it ends up basically Jesus saying, before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham came into existence, I already was. He is identifying himself very clearly as the I am of the Old Testament. And they understood it to mean this, because we read at the end of chapter 8, they wanted to stone him right then and there. But he slipped away from the temple grounds. He hid himself and slipped away from the temple grounds. As he went along, picking up from there, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, so they are with him for this. We don't really ever read about them, but they are hanging around somewhere. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So there was a belief. This indicates that there was a belief amongst the Jews of that day, as has often been the case throughout history, that this physical illness, this infirmity this man had, was due to sin, either his or his parents. He was blind from birth, so I guess for it to be his sin, it had to have been something he did while in the womb. But Jesus says neither this man nor his parents sinned. But this happened so that the work of God, might be displayed in his life. So sometimes your misfortune has nothing, sometimes it does. We do need to make clear, just because Jesus exempted this man or his parents from being responsible for his blindness in this case, that does not mean that our problems in life are not, at least sometimes, the result of our sin. Sometimes they are. Many times they are. Whether it's an illness or an injury that we accumulated because we were engaged in some act that we shouldn't have been engaged in, whether we're thinking negative thoughts and that kind of seeps into our very bodies and makes us weaker, which it does, by the way, or whether we were doing something we shouldn't have done and we paid the price for it, or whether, it's like, there are plenty of times where our sinful choices and attitudes do cost us physically and materially in this life, and our physical or material misfortunes or disfavors can be directly attributed to sin. That does happen. There are sometimes when we get caught up in somebody else's sin, when somebody else sins and we pay the price for that. That happens too. That does not always happen. That is not always the case. And in this case, that was not the reason for this man's blindness. This man was born blind from birth, specifically so that Jesus could heal him here. I don't know how old this man was. He was of age. We know that he was of age. We don't know how much older he was. And his parents were both still alive. So he couldn't have been too terribly old because both of his parents were still living at this time. But his infirmity was due directly to God's will, because God intended for him to be in this position at this point in his life where Jesus would heal him. And sometimes that happens too. And that can be tough to take, because it means that God is deliberately inflicting misfortune on us in order for him to accomplish some greater purpose later on. And it's like, I would rather God not do that, actually. But that's something he did that to Job. We read about that in the book of Job. He said in Ezekiel, I'm going to kill your wife, Ezekiel. I'm going to take your wife away from you. I'm going to take the love of your life, or your wonder of your life, or whatever it is, however he called her, away from you, as an example for Israel and to see. And so he does do that sometimes, and that can be tough. Now, that is actually a position of great privilege, if God trusts you enough to be able to use you in that way, but that is tough to take. Yeah, this man nor his parents sinned, Jesus said. But this happens that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. So this is the time to do it, right now. Night is coming when no man can work. Even Jesus is going to not work at night. You have to work while you have the time to do it. There is a certain time to do it, and then there's a time not to. This is the time. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So while he's here, while he's doing this work, it's time to do it. Having said this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him. Now, so far, this man has said nothing. This blind man has not uttered a line of dialogue so far in this story. Apparently, they called him to them. But I don't know what he's thinking about at this point in time. Remember, he was born blind, so he doesn't even know what it's like to see. Now, some of the other instances in the Scriptures, in the New Testament, of Jesus healing blind men, we don't know whether those men were blind from birth or they became blind as life went on. But this man was born blind, so he doesn't even know what it's like to see. This is the only recorded healing of a blind person where the blind person was specified as being blind from birth. Interestingly enough, there are no records of prophets healing blind men in the Old Testament. The closest thing we come to is in 2 Kings when Elisha strikes a bunch of foreign soldiers blind, and then they recover. But they were not blind to begin with. They were struck blind because they were coming, I think they were coming after Elisha, and their sight was restored to them later, but that wasn't even like a natural blindness to begin with. God reserved that particular miraculous healing until the New Testament. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed, and came home seeing. Now again, remember, this is happening at the end of or just after the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Scriptures don't say it, but apparently, according to other sources, archaeological sources or other written Jewish sources from the same time period, this Feast of Tabernacles ended with a big ceremony where they would take water from this pool of Siloam, the same pool, and bring it to the temple, representing the flowing water. At the end of Ezekiel, we see this vision of this grand and glorious future temple where water is going to be coming out of the temple, out of Jerusalem, and flowing the whole way back at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 2, when it talks about the Garden of Eden. It talks about this garden with these waters that split in 4 directions, and basically water the 4 directions of the earth, north, south, east, and west. The image I get in my mind is that it's on top of a mountain and the waters are going down each side of the mountain. But the idea is that there is this central source where God's presence is, where God dwells. And from there, it's supposed to water the entire earth. Ezekiel pictures this again in this vision of the temple at the end of Ezekiel. And that's apparently the imagery that they are trying to capture at the end of their Feast of Tabernacles, which again is when this is happening. When the priest would carry, I guess, a bucket of water from this pool of Siloam to the temple as the ceremony indicating that someday living water, which Jesus claims he can provide, but someday this temple will be the source of living water for all the world, as the garden was in the beginning, and as Ezekiel prophesied about the temple at the end of Ezekiel. And Jesus says that's him. He's the living water. He's going to provide it. He doesn't actually say he is the living water. He says he is the bread of life, but he'll provide the living water. I'm not sure if there is a difference, but that is the way it's worded. So anyway, that's the pool that this man is going to. So he came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was, but others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and I washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. You notice how in this conversation every line has to end with something like "he said," or "they said," or "the man replied," or "they asked him." Remember, in the original Greek, the original language, they didn't have periods, punctuations, or line spacing for dialogue changes, so they had to indicate the dialogue changes in the text. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. I don't know if this is all the same day or another day or later. Jesus is still in the temple. He's still in Jerusalem because he finds this guy later. So Jesus has not left. So I'm assuming this is all happening, maybe not the very same day, but in relatively quick succession. This is all happening in a relatively short time frame, maybe all the same day, because Jesus doesn't leave Jerusalem, even though the feast would be over by now, until after this is all settled. Anyway, they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath, of course, because it was probably the last day of the feast, which would have been the first day of the second week, which is, of course, well, actually, no, the last day would be a Sabbath, so either this was right after the Feast of Tabernacles, or it was at the end of that first week of the Feast of Tabernacles, that week of the Feast of Tabernacles. But it's around the same time frame, because Jesus has not left Jerusalem after the Feast of Tabernacles yet. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. He does not keep the Sabbath. This is a big deal to them, because this is what they got criticized for when they were condemned from the land in the days of Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah even said, for 70 Sabbaths, so the 70 years, yearly Sabbaths, the land is going to lie fallow. And when they got back into the land, and Jeremiah himself had said before the exile actually happened, in the last days before that, he said, if you'll just keep the Sabbath, God will let you stay in the land. You can do all these other evil things you're doing. If you just do this one thing, this one barometer of your faithfulness to God, keep the Sabbath, and He'll still let you stay in the land. They couldn't even do that. And you see a lot that really focus on also when they do get back into the land. Oops, excuse me. And Ezra and Nehemiah, how zealous Nehemiah was to make sure they did not work on the Sabbath. So they put a big deal on the Sabbath, because probably because they attributed their fall of their previous temple and their exile to Babylon. Probably they attributed that not only to their idolatry, but they did get rid of their idols after that, but also to their not keeping the Sabbath. So that was a big deal to them. Whoops. Wait, where am I? Yeah, there we go, okay. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? So they were divided. Now, elsewhere in the Gospels, they'll say, well, he does those by the power of Satan. He's in league with Satan, so he drives out demons by the power of Satan. John's Gospel doesn't actually say that, but they do accuse him of being demon-possessed. Now, also, their actual Sabbath, because the Sabbath was so important to them, they had built up an entire body of traditions about the Sabbath, more so than the actual Sabbath laws themselves called for, and that's what Jesus is violating in their eyes. He's not actually violating the God-given commands of the Sabbath, but their fence they put around the Sabbath. And they didn't like that either. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. What do you have to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he's a prophet. The Jews still did not believe, these in this case would be the leaders of the Jews, still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight, until they sent for the man's parents. Now both of them apparently are still alive, so this man's probably still relatively young. Is this your son, they asked? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? You better give us the right answer, you two. Otherwise you're going to be in all kinds of trouble. We know that he is our son, the parents answered, and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age, he will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. Again, this would be the leaders of the Jews. For already the Jews, or the Jewish leaders, had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah, would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he's of age, ask him. That basically means they're being excommunicated. They're being cut off. They're not just being, it's not like they're just not being allowed to go to church, okay? It's not a simple matter of somebody not being allowed to attend synagogue services every Sabbath. They're being basically cut out from the community. If you're not in the synagogue, in the Jewish synagogue and community, you're basically not a member of that community. So you don't have the resources, or you don't have access to the resources or the help you could get from that community. And that'd be a pretty big deal. And John's readers, at least some of them, the Jewish readers, may have been experiencing that at the time that he's writing, or they have experienced that maybe. Another book in the New Testament that seems to have that as its background is the book of Hebrews, which is written specifically to Hebrew Christians and seems to be writing to people who are in danger of, or maybe already have been, thrown out of the synagogue, their local synagogue, which again basically means they're being excommunicated, they're being cast out of the Jewish family. They're basically being said, you're not a Jew anymore, you're an unclean Gentile, go away from us. They're not being put to death, but they are basically being cast out of the community, and this could be a death sentence in the sense that Rome accepted Judaism as a legal religion, and Christians were trying to claim, of course, that Christianity was the fulfillment of Judaism, so Christianity, by therefore, also was a legal religion within Rome, the Roman system. So if the Jews then say, no, you're not a Jew, you're not part of the synagogue, you're out there, then the Christians would have to explain for themselves why they weren't worshiping Caesar or the other gods or participating in the Roman state worship. And if they could not satisfactorily explain that, that would put them in Rome's crosshairs. So in that regards, it could be a death sentence. Now the Jews, as we see in other later New Testament books, had no problems killing the Jewish Christians themselves. But simply casting them out of the Jewish synagogues itself could carry close to a death penalty if the Roman leaders in that area saw them now as violating Roman customs. Jews were exempt from having to do that, but Christians weren't, unless, of course, the Christians could convince the Romans that they were just following perfect Judaism, and so that's going to be a factor in some of the New Testament books. At any rate, these parents did not want to be excommunicated from their Jewish community, and so it's not a simple matter of simply not being allowed to go to the synagogue on Saturday, or as we would think of it today, you're just not allowed to go to that church. No, it was more than that. It was deeper than that. A second time they summoned a man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. So this is a solemn charge to tell the truth. Way back in Joshua, when in the book of Joshua, when they were still first coming into the land, in Joshua chapter 7, I believe, they had fought Jericho. They had won the battle against Jericho, where the walls came tumbling down. Then the next battle they fought was against a much smaller and less consequential city named Ai. And they thought they were going to win that one easily, but they got defeated on the first go-around. It's because after the Battle of Jericho, one member of the Israelite army sinned by taking some of the treasure for himself. They were supposed to put everything up to God in Jericho, which basically means they put everything under the ban. They were supposed to burn it all up to God. But one man decided to take some of the treasure for himself, the booty, the loot, and he hid it in a hole under his tent. And because of that, the entire community was judged guilty of sin, and so the second battle they fought against Ai, they lost. So they had to figure out what the problem was. They had to root out the sin in the camp. And when the loss finally fell to this guy, Achan, Joshua and the leaders said, give glory to God and tell us what you did. So this is a solemn charge to tell the truth. Give glory to God. Tell us the truth. You're being charged with saying the truth and nothing but the truth. We know this man is a sinner. Agree with us, in other words. Agree with us. That's our version of the truth. Anything you got to say, anything you're going to say has got to agree with us, otherwise you're not telling the truth. He replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, You are this fellow's disciple! We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses. But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, but he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Now that's an oversimplification. There are plenty of passages in the Psalms and the Proverbs and other places that say that God will listen to the needy, the poor in spirit, who are humbly asking for his help, but will not listen to the proud or the haughty. That God does listen to sinners because we're all sinners. At some point, he listens to all of us since we're all sinners. But this is an oversimplification. But the point is, he listens to. The point is that this fellow, Jesus, could not be doing these things if he did not have God's power in him. So therefore, he can't be a sinner. He has to be a prophet at least. He has to be a genuine speaker for God, because otherwise he couldn't do these things. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. Again, there are no such recorded instances in the Old Testament. If this man were not from God, he couldn't do nothing. To this they replied, You were steeped in sin at birth! How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. So they think he was a sinner from birth. That's why he was born blind. He sinned in the womb somehow. Maybe he kicked his mom a little too hard one day, I don't know. But that's why he was born blind, and that's why they don't have to listen to him, so you're gone, dude. You're out. They didn't just pick him up by the scruff of his neck and throw him out. They may have done that. They may well have done that. But they didn't. That's when they say they threw him out. They're not just talking about grabbing him by the collar of his tunic and throwing him out of the building, even though they may have done that. They're talking about they put him out of the synagogue. He's gone. He's excommunicated. He's persona non grata. No, he's not welcome here anymore. He's an unclean pagan. He's not a proper Jew any longer. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, so he's gone. He's been excommunicated for Jesus' sake. And when he found him, he said, Do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said, You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And Jesus accepted this worship, thereby declaring himself to be God, because only God accepts worship. Jesus said, For judgment I have come into this world, that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Now he said earlier that he was sent to the world to save the world, and not to condemn it. But in the process of saving it, he condemns those who don't believe in his name. His goal is to save. His goal is not to condemn. The condemnation will happen for those who do not accept his offer of salvation. It's the same thing we've been talking about since we started looking at this whole Day of the Lord concept. The Day of the Lord is a day of judgment and condemnation for those who are not ready for it, but it's a day of deliverance and salvation for those who are. God wants us to be on the right side of the Day of the Lord, so that when it happens, we'll be saved. But if we're not, we will be condemned. Jesus will say later that he himself doesn't condemn, but that the word he spoke will condemn. If you don't believe the word he spoke, you will be condemned. Hey, Kat. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this, so they're always lingering around. And they asked, What? Are we blind too? What are you talking about, you crazy man? Jesus said, If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin, but now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. This is the same concept that he teaches in the other Gospels when he says, Woe to you, places who saw my works and rejected them. You know, his hometown, or the Capernaum where he made his base of operations. And he says, if the miracles that had been performed in you had been performed in these pagan towns of the past, like even Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented and remained. But you've seen all this, and you still reject it, so you have no excuse. It doesn't mean that you're without sin, or that you're without guilt. We all have that. But the more aware you are of it, and the more you choose to reject, repenting of that sin, the more guilty you are, the more you condemn yourself. I tell you the truth. The man who does not enter into the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to him, to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought them all out, he goes. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of him. Now this goes back to John 1, where he said, everyone who calls in his name is given the right to become his own. He goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from a stranger because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. My cats recognize my voice, so they're not afraid of me. They don't necessarily follow me, although sometimes they do. If I'm out here in the living room, they'll tend to be out here in the living room, like this cat is right now, and then that cat is over there. If I'm out here in the living room, they tend to come in the living room. If I go into the bedroom, they tend to go into the bedroom. So in a sense, they do kind of follow me, but they know my voice, and they're not scared of me. If someone else were to come in, which I've seen before, they know some of my friends' voices too. But if someone else were to come in who they didn't recognize, they'd go hide in the bed, under the bed in the bedroom. Well, two of them would. One of them would not. This one over here would not. Apparently sheep do act this way. I'm not a shepherd. I've never been around sheep, but apparently sheep do act this way. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. So he's being more direct here. He was trying to insinuate this by giving him this figure of speech, but they didn't get it, so he's just outright saying, I am what I was just talking about. So this is not, I don't know if this is one of the official I am statements, but there you see, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief only comes to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Of course, David himself, the king that God wanted over Israel, was a shepherd initially. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason, now he could be talking about wayward Jews, like the tax collectors and sinners that were mentioned in the other Gospels, which really don't factor prominently in John. He could be talking about the Samaritans. He could be the half-breeds. He could be talking about Gentiles, or all of them. It's not just going to be these people. The reason my Father loves me is I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. So he went to the cross because he chose to be obedient to God all the way up to the cross. And even at the very end, as Luke records, his last words were, I give, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So even at the very end, he was still voluntarily giving up his spirit to God in death. And I lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. At these words, the Jews were again divided. Many of them said, He is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?